out whether they've been successful in bidding for £3 million of state funding. It certainly would transform the school. They would swap their crowded premises in Hysing Green for another site where they could expand their present intake of 80 pupils. Out of 7,000 state-funded faith schools in England, there are just 5 that are Muslim, and one in our region, in Leicester, doesn't open until 2007. Well, joining me here at the Islamia School to discuss some of those issues are the principal of the school, Dr. Musharraf Hussain, and Peter Flack from the National Union of Teachers. First of all, Dr. Hussain, what makes this school special?
Well, the British law states very clearly that children are to be educated according to the wishes of the parents. And this is why we have 7,000 faith-based schools. And education is about values, it has particular aims. And the parents like to have some sort of say into what is being taught to their children. And secondly, I think we've got to realise that Britain is a multicultural, multi-faith society, and it is diverse, and the faith schools reflect that diversity. But I think third, which is the most important reason, is the fact that faith schools are there to help develop traditional moral values such as compassion, forgiveness, and they're also there to grow the children's spirituality. And they teach God. I think it's a very important factor.
There'll be plenty of time, don't worry. But let me bring in Peter Flack here, because Dr. Hussain has talked about diversity and the need for that moral compass in effect. I mean, there is basically some injustice here, isn't there? Given all the thousands of faith schools that are either Anglican or Catholic, and just 5 that are Muslim.
Well, yes, if you think that faith schools are a good idea. Actually, I think that we shouldn't be having any faith schools at all. In my view, we should be getting rid of the church schools, the Catholic schools, putting them back into the state sector.
But that's not where we are now, though, Peter, is it?
Well, I think that's where we should be, because really the place for religion is in the church, it's in the synagogue, it's in the temple, it's in the mosque. It's not in the schoolroom. What you're talking about, if you have faith schools, is not allowing children to develop and learn and experiment and find out for themselves, but to actually propagate and put forward particular ideas which you want them to have. And I don't think education's about imposing views on children.
Well, what do you say, Dr. Hussain, to people who'll be watching this and will fear that faith schools, Muslim faith schools, segregate communities, don't bring communities together?
Well, I think we need to see some evidence that faith schools actually lead to divisiveness, and they produce pupils who are not fit for the society. I think the evidence is quite to the contrary, that faith schools have always produced students who are really well balanced and who actually end up doing some of the best and the most important work in society, like teaching, social work, community work. Those are the products of good faith schools.
And yet we had the worries, the concern of Trevor Phillips, from the Commission for Racial Equality, who feared that perhaps we are sleepwalking to a more segregated society.
Well, I don't really, I mean, I can take you to dozens of middle-class white ghettos here in Nottingham. I can take you to another dozen of working-class white ghettos here. If you walk out of this school here, you will see a very diverse and a rich community. And I don't know what he's talking about, to be honest.
You see, Peter, I mean, there's no doubt that faith schools are popular, are they? There seems to be a waiting list of parents who are keen to get their children, say, into a Catholic faith school or an Anglican faith school, because they see the academic standards and they say, yes, we'd like a piece of that too.
Well, some of them are successful. Actually, some of them are in special measures at the moment, so it's not the case that faith schools are actually universally more successful. And I don't think either that they actually do anything to break down segregation. They do separate. You look at the experience in Northern Ireland, you look at the report on the Bradford riots, and what you see is actually that they encourage segregation. Both of my children go to ordinary state schools with a Muslim majority. All of the festivals of all of the communities are celebrated and all of the children are happy. And I believe that comprehensive state education with no faith basis is the best thing for children.
Okay, well, Peter Flack and Dr. Hussain, thank you for the meantime. Well, what about the pupils? What do they make of all of this? My colleague Andy Whitaker is with some pupils in a classroom upstairs.
Yes, John, and it's a vibrant and colourful classroom, as you can see here. Big emphasis, obviously, on Islam, but everything else you'd expect in a mainstream school classroom is here. There's literacy and numeracy charts on the walls, for instance. 3 teenagers here, And first of all with me is Kulsum. Now Kulsum, you did used to go to a mainstream school, didn't you? So what was that like and how does it compare to this school?
Well, at the mainstream school it was a bit different, the behavior. There was a lot of racism and bullying, whereas in this school it was a very good Islamic environment. There's no racism and excellent behavior.
You say racism, what kind of things happened to you?
We used to wear our hijabs basically in mainstream school, and they used to bully us by saying that, why do you have this on your head? And here no one is here to ask us about our hijab.
So when you moved here, obviously a big change in that terms. Did you ever try to explain why you did wear it?
No, not really. I used to ignore them.
It must have been awful though for you.
Yeah, very awful.
And now you're here, it's a very different environment as you say, but there obviously are similarities. You're learning the same subjects for instance, but extra ones too.
Yes, extra.
So which of the extras do you really like?
Basically we learn Arabic, Islamic studies, Quranic studies, and a lot of arts also, technology. And these subjects are very good and I really enjoy them.
Now, there are some people who criticise faith schools because they think that people who are in a faith school perhaps don't see as much of other religions, of other faiths as they should do. Do you think that's true?
No, not at all. In our Islamic studies we do learn about Christians and the Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, and other prophets. So we respect all faiths.
Now Zabina, you have got friends in mainstream schools as well. In fact, you used to go to a mainstream school too. Would your friends want to come here, your Muslim friends?
Some of them, yeah.
But not the others?
No, not the others.
What reasons do they give you for that?
They go that they want to have an Islamic atmosphere. They like it here because we learn a lot of different studies. For example, we learn here Arabic, like Kulsum mentioned. We learn Islamic studies, we respect other faiths, and we enjoy it here.
It's interesting to think about respecting other faiths, learning about other faiths, because I think people from the outside looking in think that it's just all about Islam, and it obviously isn't.
It's got different religions we talk about, and we respect all of them. We discuss in our topics in Islamic studies about what Christians believe, what Jews believe, and what other people believe.
And do you think you mix with enough non-Muslims now?
Yeah, we do. We talk about a lot of them.
And Qasim, you used to go to a mainstream school too, so what were the big differences you noticed when you first came here?
It's we pray here and we weren't allowed to pray in the other school.
You weren't allowed to pray?
No, because there wasn't a room to pray, and it's easier to fast when it's Ramadan because everyone else is fasting, and they're the main differences. And plus the studies are different as well. We had Islamic studies and Arabic, the extra ones, and I really enjoy them.
I know you really like Arabic because you were telling me that earlier on, so that's one of the advantages of being here. Did you learn any Arabic at all when you were at a mainstream school?
No.
Well, there you are, John. These are students who are learning all the things that they would in a mainstream school, but as you've heard, extras as well. Back to you.
Thanks, Andy. Well, let's find out a little bit more about those extras, shall we, here at the Islamia School in Nottingham. I'm joined by some more guests. Sajida Munir, who's the deputy head of the school. Zaki Malik, who's a parent who sends a son to the school. Sadish Kapoor, who's a former teacher who sent his two children to a state comprehensive in Leicester, and Councillor Graham Chapman from Nottingham City Council, who's responsible at the end of the day for education in this city. Let me first of all come to Zahid. You've got a son here. What persuaded you, Zahid, that this faith school was right for your son?
Right. I think it's important, because I'm a Muslim, that my son is educated and made aware of his religion. Also at the same time, I feel that he should have a good education. And I felt that those two qualities were represented within this school. I've been associated with this school on and off for a number of years.
But what persuaded you that your son will get a better education here rather than in a comprehensive in the city?
Right, the school, the class that he's currently in, there's about 16 now, and he gets good one-to-one education from his teachers. There are also times during the day where teachers are available, where he can approach them to speak to them about any issues, problems, and I felt that that really compensates in terms of the quality of education. Also after school they're available again.
Well, let's bring in Satish. You've had two children that have gone through state comprehensives in Leicester. Are you persuaded by that argument?
Well, not really. When you look into Britain is a multiracial, multi-ethnic and by and large, it's a secular society. And I wanted my children to grow in that environment. That was one of the reasons I wanted to send my children to state school. The second reason was, a very important reason from my point of view, was that in state school, teachers are appointed because of their ability, not because of their religion. And the education, the governors are also appointed because of their commitment to the education, not they are there because of the religion. And for these two very reasons, I thought my children can develop their potential, educational potential, in the best way if they go to a school where they meet children from all backgrounds.
All backgrounds. Well, Sajida, you've worked in both sectors, haven't you? You're deputy head here at the Islamia School, but you've also worked in the state sector as well. What is the argument that you would have to answer some of the concerns of Satish and many other parents probably watching?
I mean, like you said, I've worked in state schools. I mean, like state schools, we teach the national curriculum, the full national curriculum, and within the curriculum we embed the love of God. But the extra things that we do teach is obviously Islamic studies and Quranic reading, but we also teach children about and to respect and value other people's faiths too.
How is that done though? How are pupils that come here given, if you like, the wider perspective of the diverse society that we have and other faiths?
Well, they are taught about other faiths, and the children get taught about moral values as well. Comparing to state schools, the children that are taught moral values, and for instance, you know, there's hardly any bullying here. There's no racial discrimination here. Everybody is taught to be equal. Everybody is taught to love thy neighbour and to live in a multicultural society. We teach the children to be the best citizens within Nottingham.
Okay, let me bring in Graham Chapman in here, because at the end of the day, Graham Chapman, although the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, talks about his enthusiasm for faith schools, it's down to people like you, local politicians like you, to sort out the fine detail, the nitty-gritty. I mean, what would persuade you that there is a good case here for the Islamic school to get that £3 million of state funding?
Well, in principle, I've got to accept that if you're going to have schools which are mainly Catholic or C of E, then you cannot possibly object to a Muslim school. There are, however, some quite serious practicalities.
And what are those?
There's at least two or three. The first is that it's got to get acceptance from a wide base within the community, within the Muslim community, and that's not always the case. That's very important. Second is we are closing schools at the moment. In most cities are, not because there's a depopulation. There are fewer children being born. Now, there is a chance that a new school opening in the wrong place in the city could destabilise schools. For example, in this area, we've just reorganised schools. We're in the middle of a reorganisation.
So the principle of having Muslim schools, I'm assuming the City Council would welcome?
In principle, you can't object. You can object to faith schools. That's a coherent argument. You cannot object to Muslim schools when you've got Catholic schools. And you can't do that. I mean, just not consistent. So we've got no problems with that. Our problems are practical ones. The practical ones of adding yet another school when you've just reorganised and there are fewer pupils to go around. You could end up with additional spare places. That could be difficult. There's a further one is to do with how you get a mix. Now, we do encourage our Catholic and our C of E schools to try and take Muslims, for example, or people of non-faith, in order to get some sort of mix. Now, that's another challenge for a Muslim school.
Okay, let's talk about challenges, because Peter Flack, it struck me, one of the sad things that Sajida was referring to, and actually one of the pupils was referring to, was the attraction of coming here was they felt more protected from taunts, racist taunts by other pupils. Now, that's a fact of life in many of our comprehensive schools.
That's a fact of life which we need to tackle collectively, not by separating people off. If you took that strategy, then actually you would say, what kind of groups of people get bullied? Well, gays get bullied, women can be subject to sexual harassment. Do you actually provide separate education for every single potential group who could be bullied, or do you say, no, we need a collective response to this, we need to promote tolerance, understanding and so on? And to do that in such a way that children actually share the experience with a whole range of pupils. Any kind of segregation seems to me to be inappropriate. And I have to say that I understand the arguments made on behalf of this school, but the things like class sizes at the school will not apply if it becomes a state school. Those kind of benefits will disappear. And it seems to me that, therefore, actually what you're looking at is a situation where the school is putting forward one set of values, thinking that that will help them in the state sector, but it won't in practice, because if you become a state school, you will not be able to operate in the way that you're currently doing.
Let me bring in Dr. Hussain, because that's one of the attractions, it strikes me, of faith schools, isn't it? Because the classroom sizes are much smaller than you get in a normal school.
This will not be an issue because we will have to comply with what are the regulations. But I think we must come back to the idea of faith schools as being basic human rights. Education is not about feeding data into the brains of children. Education is about nurturing values, and we all have values. There are people who agree with secular values, but there are others who are now questioning the usefulness of secular values, and that is 1/3 of children at this very moment are going to faith schools, and there are many, many others who are waiting to go on to it. I think we've got to respect this basic human right that people have to be educated the way the parents want them to be educated, and education is not valueless, and secularists can talk in this way because they have upper hand at this moment. They have their way in the state system, and the people of faith want to make sure that they are not trampled upon their rights of choosing their faith, their own values is allowed. But I think we must remember, at the end of the day, our aim is to produce the best citizens for this country, for its prosperity. We want to make sure that people come out not just materialistic beings who are just another consumers, but people with real values. And that is what faith schools are about, the love of God, love of human beings, really.
There is no evidence to suggest that parents want more faith schools. What parents want is a good school where their educational potentials can be developed and they can get the skills so that they can get the jobs. I think the demand for the faith school is more coming from religious establishments who are scared that their children are becoming more secular in their outlook, and in order to stop that, the demand from the faith school is coming from the religious...
Bring Zahid in here because as a parent, I mean, we're having this discussion against the background, obviously, of the London bombings and concern about terrorism of one kind or another. What's the important thing that you would want to get across to your son as they are reading the papers, watching the television news about concern about international terrorism that seems to be coming from Muslim fundamentalists?
I think what we need to do is just iterate that it's about choice, and really it was my choice, and we had a discussion with my son for him to actually decide, and we decided collectively for him to come attend this school. But at the end of the day, it's important that he's schooled not only in his religious beliefs, but he's also given that sort of atmosphere where he can learn and be educated, because he will be a community member, and it's about him going on into further education and actually making himself somebody who can actually benefit the society around him. And really what we need to do is think on those lines. With regard to Islam itself, the real Islam is taught in this school, which is about loving thy neighbour, about respecting values, is about actually educating tolerance and being inclusive.
I'm going to have to interrupt you here, talking about respect. Thank you very much for joining us here at the Islamia School. But let me come to Dr. Hussain just as we wrap up this discussion, because there will be parents, relatives, staff here that will be acutely concerned about what's happening in Pakistan with the earthquake. Can you just briefly give us an update?
We sadly had one of the teacher here whose family, nearly half of the family has died in Muzaffarabad, and we are making an appeal through our charity Muslim Hands, and we were hoping to help the people in Muzaffarabad and in that area.
OK, Dr Hussain and all the guests, thank you very much indeed. And indeed, I understand that the Department of Education hope to make a decision in the next 3 weeks about the funding. £3 million, will they get it? That's it for us here in the East Midlands. We'll be back next week with Mari here, but from me, it's back to John Sopel.